Let me take this opportunity to greet everybody and welcome you to this media briefing, but also thank you for honoring our invitation at such a short notice on this Friday. Colleagues, as you would have seen on the alert that we shared with yourselves, that this is not necessarily our usual media briefings. The Minister of Energy and Electricity, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, has convened this briefing to make an announcement on the nuclear determination. And he is then joined by the DG, the Director General, in the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, as well as the DG is Mr. Jacob Mbele. Next to him, we have Mr. Zizamele Mbambo, who is the DDG responsible for nuclear in the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. Colleagues, without further ado, I wish to invite the Minister to the podium to commence with today's briefing. And following the announcement that he will make, himself as well as the DG will be very happy to take questions from yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tsakani, and good morning to members of the media. Once more, thank you very much for acceding to our request that we want to have a date with you and to convey to the country, if you like, the announcement that we'll be making in relation to our nuclear build program. As indicated, I'm with the DG and the DDG. Just to locate this announcement, I had made the point over and over again that I'm going to make everything possible to ensure that the relationship that we have as a ministry, especially in relation to the performance of the grid, our ability to procure new generation capacity, but also in particular the issues around the nuclear build program, is going to be a very transparent process. And I've made the point that I'm going to take the country every step of the way, especially on critical milestones, so that there's a greater level of appreciation, that there's transparency in the manner in which we want to procure this build program, and we are able to build confidence in the process. So we are making this point because the previous attempt to procure nuclear was soiled in issues of, as others will argue, a veil of secrecy, not understanding essentially the procurement process, and that alone has undermined the ability of the country to be able to benefit from this clean, reliable, and efficient source of energy. And when I made the determination, I made the point to the country, and I want to repeat that we are going to ensure that we are very transparent as we communicate to you every step of the way in relation to the build program. So it is in that spirit that I'm coming back to the country in fulfilling that commitment, and will continue to execute against that commitment, that I want to make an important announcement that is going to ensure that we are reinforcing, if you like, that commitment, the transparency in the process that we are procuring this nuclear program, build program, but also on other avenues, fuel sources that are going to power the South African energy requirement. Just a bit of a background so that there's a greater level of appreciation of where we are at, and also what informs the announcement that I'll be making here. It will be important for me to do a bit of recap. What is that recap? Is that the IRP 2019, which is really a comprehensive articulation of the energy sources that are going to help us to meet the demand in the country, essentially an identification of the mix of energy sources that are going to power the South African economy. It also talks about if you like, the cost associated with that, with each individual fuel source. All of those are codified in a document that we call the Integrated Resource Plan. So the latest version of that integrated resource plan is the IRP 2019, as many of you will know, we are in the process of revising that IRP 2019, so we're confident that we'll be able to produce a more updated version of the IRP. And I've reported the last time I was here that we have received substantial submission from a multitude of organizations, individual South Africans who want to register their views on how best to construct and update the IRP 2019 and culminating in IRP 2023. But in that IRP 2019, because it's the most applicable IRP, there's what we refer to as decision number 8. And what that decision says is it implores the erstwhile Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. Of course, I'm saying erstwhile because now the 7th administration has reconfigured the departments, but at the time we're referring to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. So it implored the department to commence the preparations for a nuclear build program to the extent of 2,500 megawatts. And it makes the point that at the pace and scale that the country can afford. So it must answer the question of the pace, how rapid can we be able to deploy that, the scale, what is the size of the megawatts, but also having answered the size of the megawatts, you need to answer the question whether the country is in the position to afford that. And it classifies this as a no-regret option. And of course, what the IRP was doing, it was envisaging that we're going to scale down on generation from coal-fired power station come 2030. So it was building, if you like, the backbone of South African energy generation beyond 2030. As you can imagine, nuclear is a build program that takes an extended period of time, but you need to start so that you are able to benefit from that fuel source sometime in the future, and the horizon was going to extend beyond 2030. So decision number 8 says DMRE can do that, make that, answer those questions on pace and scale. And of course, we're talking about the 2,500 megawatts. So essentially, there's a basis upon which the department went out. And then my predecessor then directed that it is important that we are able to issue an intention to make a determination under Section 34.1 of the Electricity Regulation Act. So that's the provision of the ERA, the Electricity Regulation Act, that allows the minister to make a determination on what are the new fuel sources that are going to be part of the mix going into the future. And that the department must then communicate with Nersa, an independent body in the country, the intention to do that so that we start the process of seeking Nersa concurrence. And I do confirm that Nersa received that request from the minister in August of 2020, seeking concurrence in relation to a Ministerial Determination 34. With regards to the procurement of nuclear. And remember, now we're talking about the 2,500 megawatts of a build program. And as is the requirement in this country, it is important that you are able to bring everyone on board, the stakeholders, communities, and everyone, all and sundry, so that they are part of the decision-making process. So Nersa then sits with that responsibility of ensuring that this request is then placed before the public for a public participation process, because there's an established practice in this country is the democratization of key policy decisions so that you are able to ensure that there's a considerable buy-in by the population. And Nersa started that exercise in February of 2021. That process ran until August of that year, 2021, and it is at that point that then Nersa decided on the back of this public consultation that, yes, we concur with the minister in relation to this bill program, but then they attached 3 suspensive conditions. So essentially they say, in principle we agree, but there are 3 things that you need to do before you can get this full concurrence. So essentially for the concurrence to be in place, there are three things that the department needed to do. That's what we call, in legal speak, they call them suspensive conditions. And those suspensive conditions need to be satisfied so that the concurrence can kick in. What are those suspensive conditions? The first one was that there has to be a recognition of the fact that technology in the nuclear space has evolved, and therefore the department must illustrate how they are going to take into account the evolution of that technology advancement. The second requirement was that it must further elaborate on the rationality of the 2,500 megawatts. So remember I said the determination was to procure 2,500 megawatts of nuclear capacity. And of course, in answering that question, you have to compute what we call the demand analysis. You must do a computation of what is the projected, what we call the load profile, the amount of demand that will be placed on the grid post-2030. Because there's an admission that you are not going to build this program, you are not going to get this megawatts from nuclear before 2030. I've explained it's a very long process for you to be able to build a nuclear power station, and of course how that fits into the energy mix. So that's what the second suspensive condition. So the department had an obligation to answer that question. And then the third one was that the new nuclear power program should be procured through what we call an EPC procurement contract. EPC means engineering, procurement, and also construction, rather than a fragmented approach. So essentially you have a turnkey engineering company does the design, the actual construction, and then they deliver the power station. And they said that the department had an obligation to come back to Nersa and illustrate how this is going to be achieved. And of course, the department did all that they could to ensure that this is satisfied. And of course, they were successful in producing reports that answers those three suspensive conditions, and then they submitted these reports to Nersa. And then Nersa then evaluated these submissions and then arrived at a determination that these are satisfactory, and on the basis of that, then Nersa decided that now you've got the concurrence, you can proceed. And it is during that period that the transition happened in relation to the department that carries the responsibility of Section 34.1. So as you know that the Ministry of Electricity was then introduced in that period, so it meant that then the responsibility of executing that concurrence sat with the Minister of Electricity. And of course the Minister of Electricity, having satisfied himself with the process followed by the predecessor, then we arrived at a determination that now we are going to gazette. We are going to gazette this Section 34 determination, and we called a press conference here in the same room to say we are gazetting. Then the next step was to determine the procurement framework. After the ministry had gazetted, then there was an interdict. There was a legal process that was initiated by three parties. The first one is the Democratic Alliance, the second one is Earth Life Africa, and then the third party is South African Faith Communities Environment Institute. The DA one really is really a procedural issue to say that the minister that is gazetting, the process was run by one minister but is gazetted by another minister. So from a legal counsel point of view, it's an issue that could be easily argued. So we don't think that it is that material, and in fact the remedy, if we are requested to make that remedy, it will be easy for us to effect that remedy. But the ones that has been raised by Earth Life Africa and the South African Faith Community Environment Institute, that was substantive. It was substantive in the following sense. Their argument is that, and of course we get to learn of this argument when papers are filed. Their argument is the following, is that yes, Nersa went out initially to say that the minister, DMRE at the time, wants to issue this determination. They ran a public consultation process. That consultation process, various parties participated, upward of 250 parties or so participated in that process. And then on the back of that, Nersa came back and said, I concur, but there are these 3 suspensive conditions that I've mentioned. Nersa then said to the department at the time, answer these suspensive conditions. I just shared with you that the department responded on those suspensive conditions. Nersa received the answers, the report on the suspensive conditions, and then Nersa said, we are fine, you can proceed. What these parties are arguing is the following, is that yes, there was a public participation process. That public participation process resulted in Nersa issuing the concurrence subject to the substantive conditions, suspensive conditions being met. The parties are saying, when the department came back with a report on how they are going to meet the suspensive conditions, instead of Nersa sitting on its own, applying its mind and giving the final concurrence, they are arguing that Nersa had an obligation to subject that report of suspensive condition to another process of public participation. And I said to the team as a minister that we carry the responsibility of ensuring that this process that we are undertaking is subjected to the highest levels of public scrutiny, including our response in relation to the suspensive conditions. And on the back of that, I think that it is proper that we are able to extend an opportunity to these parties and other parties to evaluate, examine, critique, respond to our report in relation to how we are going to meet the suspensive conditions. So in summary, I'm saying as a minister, I agree with these applicants. I agree with Life Africa. I agree with the South African Faith Community Environment Institute that Nersa should have subjected that process to a public participation process. The last thing we want is to do a major build program on the back of suspicion that the department and government is hiding something from the public. So I said we are going to democratize this process. We are going to make it transparent. There is nothing to hide. And on the basis of that, I then directed that it is important that we accede to that request, essentially saying to Council, we are agreeing on what Life Africa is saying and the other party, that this process must be subjected to an additional, if you like, public participation process. So on the back of that, I then take the decision, and this is the announcement I'm making to the country, that I'm withdrawing the gazette. I'm withdrawing the gazette to allow for that public participation to happen. The question you will ask, but why is it that this thing did not happen before the gazette was made? This is the point. The issue of concurrence is in the Nersa domain. It has nothing to do with the ministry. It's an independent body that regulates this space, and the minister can enter into that space. The only time we got to know and be alerted that that process was not subjected to a public consultation process is when the papers were filed and the minister says we are agreeing with them. We are withdrawing that gazette. We allow for that public participation so that the process is clean, the process is transparent. Of course, there's a penalty you pay as a result of this decision, is that you are delaying the process, but we are happy to delay the process so that we are able to allow for each and every party in the country that wants to add a voice in how we are going to procure this process, for them to be given the opportunity to be able to make that submission. So it will add another 3 to 6 months in the process. We are happy to do that for as long as we protect the integrity of the process, for as long as we cement the transparency of the process, so that there's general public confidence in the work that we are doing. And as I conclude, I really want to say the following. Nuclear is part of the mix. Nuclear is part of the future. But it's important that as we go out and procure, the procurement process must be able to stand the test of time. And in this instance, is the ability to be able to subject itself to scrutiny. And that's why we're asking Nersa that let's go back to that process, accord the public an opportunity to scrutinize, respond, and then on the basis of that, you can make a determination on concurrence. Once we receive that, we'll issue the gazette and run and ensure that we procure. And I want to give a really confidence to the South African public that we'll take you every step of the way. That's a commitment we've made. We'll carry South Africans every step of the way to preserve the integrity of any procurement process, including the nuclear procurement process, especially given its checkered history. So it's important that there's an additional responsibility on the part of the minister to ensure that the process is clean and transparent, and that's why we are asking Nersa to ensure that that's subjected to public scrutiny. We're withdrawing, allow the public to make their comments, and Nersa will come back to us, and then once they give us that concurrence on the back of those comments, then we'll be able to proceed with the public procurement, the procurement of nuclear. Thank you very much, Sakai.
Minister, thank you very much for that announcement. So, colleagues, that was the announcement. And I think we should take appreciation to the history and the context in which this announcement is being made. So, colleagues, with that, we wish to open the floor to all of you, including those who are joining us online, to questions. As I indicated earlier, the Minister as well as DG Mbele are very happy to respond to all of your questions and whatever clarity that you may require with regards to this announcement. So by a show of hands, colleagues, we are ready to commence with the question and answer session. Batabile's got the microphone there. There are hands up.
Good morning. My name is Chris Yellen from EE Business Intelligence. My question is directed to the Minister. Minister, I think you've clarified the need for a further public process very eloquently. And I want to ask another matter about the process, the substantial matter about the process, and that is one of the suspensive conditions, as you pointed out, was the need to do a proper demand and supply study post 2030, for the years after 2030. That's what you indicated. And at the moment, we have the IRP 2019, which only takes up the demand supply study and the rationale and the whole logic behind the process up to that year 2030, and we're waiting for the new IRP, which is in draft form at the moment and has not yet been published. So my question is, do you not think that it is absolutely essential to wait until the IRP, the latest IRP, is published? Otherwise, you may be facing yet another legal challenge, because it is well accepted that the 2019 IRP, the very basis for it is out of date. Many of the assumptions are no longer relevant, and there is a need. It is a highly contested space, and you indicated that the IRP 2023 draft needs a study in terms of all the comments that have been made, and this has not yet been done. And should this not be done first before a final determination is made or concurrence is made? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I saw Katleo's hand, and then we'll take Deneen.
Thank you very much. My name is Katlego from the SABC. The first one is on this process that lies ahead. Maybe give us a breakdown of how things are going to be done differently this time around that Nersa did not do, because according to some role players within the space, that consultation was done. How different is this process going to be this time around? Another one is on the 2,500 megawatts, the target. Does that remain the target, or could we see the process, this process of consultations then coming through with a review of where then things stands in terms of the ambitions here? Thank you.
Thank you, Katlego. I will take Deneen.
Thanks, Deneen Erasmus from Business Day. It's similar to my colleague's question. I just want to know, when will the public participation process open, and will there be, how do you plan to host the public hearings? Will it be across the country?
Thanks, Deneen. Do we have any more questions in the room before we go to Takalani? I think Katlego will take your follow-up question, and then Takalani will take us through the questions shared on our platform.
Yeah, Katlego again from the SABC. Then what does this mean, according to you, Minister, in your understanding of the court case? We know that on the 15th and the 16th of October, this is when the High Court will be entertaining this particular matter. Does this mean that, from here, following this announcement, you're going to be consulting your legal team to also then, more or less, go into that process and maybe try to reach an out-of-court settlement with those, environmental groups that have taken you to court?
Thanks, Katlego. Takalani.
No, thank you, Tsakani. Good day, colleagues. The first question from online is coming from Helmo Cruz from Independent Media. The question is pretty much on the timelines for public participation. And then there's Antoinette Slabat from Rapport. The question is, Nersa has lost so many court battles on the basis of following the wrong processes and procedures. And does the minister believe there are capacity problems at Nersa, and if so, how will it be addressed? And there's Susan Komri from Amapungane. The question is, there were reports earlier this week that Eskom had agreed to buy electricity from car power ship supplied via ETM in Mozambique. And Eskom says it has not signed a PPA with car power ship under the RMIPPP, but it is not clear whether this deal is being pursued outside the RMIPPP. And could you confirm whether the PPA has been signed with car power ship or ETM? And could you confirm whether such a deal is currently being negotiated? And if so, would such an agreement be subjected to the same terms and conditions as the RMIPPP? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Takalani. We'll now take responses. The Minister will be responding to the questions. Thanks for all the questions.
Colleagues, thank you very much for the questions. I really want to start with the one that is asked by Anton Slabe. Your observation is spot on. I think it's a matter that we have raised with the chair of the board of Nersa, together with the DG. I think there are major capacity challenges there. And the chair appreciates that, and the CEO. And I've requested that the DG works with them to ensure that we are able to address the capacity issues. And I also don't think that they are geared to respond to the evolving nature of the energy complex in the country. The issues around feed-in tariffs, the issues around wheeling. There's a number of issues that are holding us back as a country that requires the attention of Nersa. So I'm calling it public, and it's a matter that we have engaged with Nersa on. And by their own admission, I think this process should have been handled much, much better. But I think our view is that we will work with all entities to ensure that they are properly capacitated. And Anton, you are absolutely correct that there are capacity issues that requires collective attention, and it's something that we are working on. And Chris, yes, you are absolutely right. So one of the things that we think will be resolved through, first is that I did make the point publicly that we are going to engage with the players that have made substantive submissions in relation to the IRP that we bring them under one roof. We have a conversation around what are some of the issues they have. Some of them are major issues, the critique of the version that is out for public comment, the issues of assumptions, the issues of the modeling, the issues of the cost, and all of that. And we're initiating a conversation, by the way. We'll announce in due course. Sanedi is synthesizing all of that and breaking the submissions into various thematic areas. There's a number of people that will be coming in there, and some of them are online, are in this room, who will be part of that conversation to help us to strengthen, if you like, the IRP. It's a sound foundation, but we think there's more that can be done. And you are absolutely correct in that you are going to find that there's a symbiotic relationship between that exercise and the exercise that the team will be doing. So working with the DG and Mr. Mambo also agreed that we need to put together, I think, a panel of experts, seasoned nuclear scientists, people in the energy space, to help us to refine some of those projections, the demand side modeling, the issues around the load factor, and what will be satisfied by what of that which will be satisfied by a nuclear build program. So if you like, Chris, it's going to be weaved together, almost like an integrated process. So as we refine that IRP, simultaneously we'll be answering that question on the size of that build program. But of course, the more dedicated work group on that we're putting together of technical aspect will go deeper into the issues of that renewable. So you're absolutely right. So if you don't resolve the IRP 23, the revised version, you stand the risk of a similar legal challenge. So we want to de-risk the process. So your observations are spot on, Chris. And then, Katlego, you asked the question, what is to be done differently going forward? So first is that is the point I'm making. Just when I was responding to Chris, there's that IRP process, and then the team that we are putting together to look back at the model, but also ensure that, because remember, we still need to go back to Nersa and say this is how best we want to answer the issues around the suspensive conditions. But of course, now that we have withdrawn, it means that there's no conversation around concurrence, because we really want to do the process in a much more rigorous and robust manner. We will come back on the timelines. So the team is still working on the timelines. I think what was important today was significant that we put it out there in the general public to say that on account of the submissions that have been made at court were acceding to what these other two parties are saying, that it is important that this should have been subjected to that public participation. So we are acceding to that. And Katlego, to your other question, yes, our legal counsel has made contact with the other parties. Once we withdraw, because their contention was that they are contesting the validity of the determination on the back that there has not been substantive consultation. So we are acceding to the issues that they are raising. So we really don't see that the court case will proceed, because I think they are essentially getting the remedy that they wanted. That remedy we are withdrawing. The second one is that there will be that substantive engagement on the back of the process I've mapped out when I was responding to Chris earlier on. And then on the quantum, what still remains on the floor is that 2,500 megawatts. But once the team does further computation, this number can change in either direction, upwards or downwards. I'll allow that expert team to come back and indicate what is that quantum we're talking about. Helmut, like I said, we're working on those timelines, and I'm confident that at the right time, which will be very soon, I'm confident that before the end of September, we'll have articulated what that timeline is to ensure that we're able to move with speed. I think there's a general appreciation, acceptance that nuclear is the future. So this is the point I want to emphasize, that this having withdrawn, we're not saying nuclear is the future. Increased nuclear generation capacity in addition to what we have at Kubek is going to happen. So that's the point I really need to convey. What we want to protect here is the integrity of the process, and that's why we're taking one step back to allow us to take 2 steps and multiple steps going forward. On the issues of car power ship, whether we're procuring through Mozambique, EDM, I'm not familiar with that. I'm sure ESCOM will bring it to my attention if there's anything of that nature, but that has not been brought to my attention, and of course at the right time I'm sure even ESCOM can make that announcement, but to the extent that I know, that has not been brought to my attention, so I can't say answer in the negative or the affirmative. But what is usually the case, if there was something of this magnitude, ESCOM would have definitely alerted me. And of course, I'll be receiving my peer equal from Mozambique, I think in the next week or so. So if this is an issue, it will be brought to our attention. Like I say, I share everything with the general public. I think it's important that we carry you through this journey so that there's a greater levels of appreciation. There's some degree of transparency, trust, and in fact confidence that is built in the program that we are working on as a Ministry of Energy and Electricity. To the extent that these things can be ventilated public, I'll alert you that of course there's this conversation, but because of the following it can't be public, but I'm sure a lot of the issues that we are doing are of public interest, and the public will be alerted, will keep you informed about any major development in this space. Thanks, Tagan.
Minister, thank you for all of those responses and the clarity. I think we'll now take our last round of questions for any follow-up questions that you may have before we conclude today's session. I saw Katlego raising his hand first. He'll be followed by Chris Yelland, and then we'll take Deneen. And then Takalani, if there are any questions online, we'll then come to you.
Again from the SABC. I wanted to understand the challenge around the financing of this particular process, because it's not just the procedural issue that was raised here, but we see these groupings also talking about how these processes are going to be funded and the modalities around the monies that are going to go into here. And also the concerns around issues of corruption. We know very well that in the past, certain projects like this, it's a large-scale project, and there would be those opportunistic elements. Is this something that, the minister worries about or worries of when we go into such programs, and what are we going then to do to ensure that there are no opportunistic elements that come in here that then take away from what you've envisioned in terms of the timelines that you've introduced in the completion of this particular process?
Thanks, Katlego.
Chris Yelland again. You made a statement that nuclear power is going to happen, and this is just a case of ensuring that the process cannot be challenged. I would ask whether this is not putting the cart before the horse, because, and in fact opening up to further challenge, because we still have to do this IRP that looks at the rationality of this, that looks at the pace and the scale, that looks at the demand and supply analysis. And if you're stating today that it's going to happen, you're actually in the process simply a tick box exercise in order to justify and rationalize what has already been decided that it is going to happen. So I'd like to just ask, why put the cart before the horse? Why not wait until the rationality and the costs and the supply and demand have been established properly and objectively before stating unequivocally in a public forum that it in fact is going to happen, which in my view is negating the whole purpose of the study that still has to be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Deneen again from Business Day. So I just want some clarity on when we finally then, if we get to the point of procurement and issuing a request for proposals, is that going to come from the Ministry of Energy and Electricity, or is that going to come from the Department of Minerals and Petroleum? So who will be the procuring party?
Takalani, can you take us through the online questions?
Thank you once more, Zakan. There's a question from Alex Winning from Reuters. And the question is, Minister, are you saying that you are holding off from seeking bids for a new nuclear power station for now to allow for more consultation? But as government, you still think building a new nuclear power station is a good idea. It's just that you want to ensure greater public participation and ensure people believe there is nothing secret or dishonest about the process. And Antoinette Slavat, who also is seeking clarity that any new nuclear build will be at Quebec and not in the Eastern Cape. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all those questions. The Minister will be responding shortly.
Oh, thank you very much for those questions. Nuclear is government policy. So I can state here and say there will be renewables will be built. So that's government policy. What you are answering is the space and scale that the country can afford. So that's government policy. And that does not belong to the courts. Government has taken a stand that nuclear is part of the mix. So it will happen at the pace and scale that we can afford. So that's very important. So you are not putting the carts before the horse. Otherwise, we can be, if someone contests nuclear, then they must go to the court and say to the court must prescribe to government that nuclear should not be part of government policy. So that's part of government policy. So is hydro, so is solar, so is wind. So when it's nuclear, we should hold back. When it's others, then we can speak. No, it's part of government policy. The only qualification that government makes is that pace and scale that we can afford. So that's government policy. I'm stating government policy. Government policy says that nuclear is part of the mix, Chris. And then in relation to Katlao's question, no. When the procurement framework answers those issues around the financing. And of course, I make the point that we need to make sure that you insulate it from malfeasance, leakage, and all other things. So we'll make sure that you build that into the entire process going forward. And then the other question is in relation to the request for proposal. So I think it's very clear that there is a Ministry of Energy that runs that process. One of the issues that we are resolving with the team led by the DG is, as we answer the procurement process, is what are those bodies that must be at the forefront of doing that. But ultimately it's the DG that is the Department of Energy that is doing that, because that's in our domain and part of the mandate. And then Alex, I think I'm repeating the same issues. That's government policy. So what is not in contention is government policy. And the court will not prescribe what should be government policy as long as it's not against the provisions of the Constitution. That's not what is before us. What is before us is on procedural fairness. And that's why I'm saying that if there's an in-principle objection to nuclear as a fuel source, you will be able to get it from a submission. So what we are answering really is the issue of pace and scale and also affordability. And then Slabert, no, I think it is patently clear that it's not on the basis of the earlier submissions. Like I said, that committee will then rework this because some of the initial assumptions that were in place, I mean, the issues around what demands are, what underpins the kind of forecast, the performance of the grid, and all of that were built into that computation. So we're going to do, it's a reworked submission, substantially reworked submissions going forward. And then what was the last one? Oh, on the location, no. Part of that procurement process also determined the readiness and appropriateness of the location where we are going to build this nuclear program. So I think there's about 2 candidate sites. They'll evaluate all of those and determine the most appropriate site for us to be able to locate this build program. So I really want to say thank you very much for making time joining us this morning at a very, very short notice. I think it's important that we take the country along on each and every milestone, the steps that we are taking, so that we are able to build confidence in this process, the issues that Katlego was raising, ensuring that they are insulating it from all kind of things that can soil, if you like, the process that we are working on. And like I said, we do guarantee that working with Nersa, the kind of capacity that is required, not just in this area and many other areas, we'll work with the chair and the CEO, collectively we'll build that capacity. I'm more than confident that with the leadership there at Nersa, the chair and the board and the CEO and the management team, we should be able to get this right. We'll ensure that there's some degree of investment there to allow Nersa to be able to execute more efficiently, not just in this area, but in many other areas. But full confidence, the leadership of the board led by Mr. Tembani Bukula, they are doing excellent work. They just need the kind of support necessary to be able to allow them the ability to execute. And like I said to the country before, is a pace and scale that we can afford so that we are able to achieve energy security, but at the same time, we are able to ensure that the country can afford and we carry everyone with us. Having said that, thank you very much for making time. I wish you a lovely Friday and an excellent weekend. Thank you.
Colleagues, that really brings us to the end of today's media briefing. I will not reiterate the Minister's appreciation for your participation in this very important process of mass communicating such critical announcements. With that, thank you. Our media briefing has come to an end.